Welcome back, everyone, to the European VC podcast. Before we dive in and say welcome to today's guest, I just want to set the context for this conversation and, of course, for climate tech in Europe more broadly. Because even with the scale and urgency of the climate transition, capital allocation remains deeply uneven. In 2024, teams founded entirely by women received just over 1% of total climate tech venture funding, and mixed-gender teams raised around 7%. Obviously, far too little. That's the backdrop of today's conversation and is why we wanted, together with the table, bring on women who are building serious climate companies and who, of course, bring the capital structures to them. Carmel, you're one of those doing that. Can you just talk a little bit about the table?
Yes, of course. Hi, Andreas. It's great to be here. So I'm Carmel, and I head the table, which is a community for co-investing in women-led climate ventures. We're non-commercial, and we bring together syndicates, funds, family offices, and CVCs to share deals pre-seed to A, where there's at least one female founder holding substantial equity. We qualify it as an equitable stake compared to a male counterpart if there is one, doing anything that has a direct and substantial positive climate outcome. So sector agnostic, but climate positive. And the reason we do that is to increase the speed and the size of capital going into women building in climate and creating a much easier access to this pipeline. In parallel, we're building the table foundation that will work alongside the community and will provide recoverable grants to match the tickets that the investors are doing in the deals shared, providing catalytic capital to accelerate the growth of underfunded innovation while closing the funding gap for women. And thank you for having me.
Of course. And just to put it abundantly clearly to everyone, it's a 300 million euro or pound foundation that Carmel is raising, which of course means that this is serious money for the ecosystem. So Carmel, thank you for doing that important work. So now let's look at our guest, Lilian Schwich. She is the CEO and co-founder of cylib, a battery recycling company based in Aachen, Germany. Cylib is building an end-to-end industrial process to recover critical raw materials from lithium-ion batteries. They closed the 55 million euro Series A round, clearly one of Europe's largest A rounds ever, of course, especially when you think that it's outside of AI. And it doesn't end there. In December 2025, cylib secured a 63.4 million euro public grant from the German Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Energy to expand its industrial recycling facility. In other words, the company sits in a beautiful sweet spot between industrial chemistry, energy security, and Europe's ambition for strategic autonomy. Lilian, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm super happy to be here.
So Lilian, I just waffled my way through a bit of a description of what you're doing. Could you make it maybe a little clearer to everyone exactly what you're doing?
Yeah, I would love to. So you precisely said we are doing battery recycling with a focus on lithium-ion batteries. And the beauty of our process is, as recyclers, we really take everything which arises as scrap, can be end-of-life battery packs from an EV car, from a truck, etc. But can be also production scraps coming from gigafactories. We take those materials and process them with our unique process. We will talk a bit more later. And then what is coming out of our process super pure, valuable raw materials, which are critical for us as Europe, and which can be then reintegrated into high-tech applications. And therefore, we actually, let's say, bring resources to another life.
Could you just expand a little bit on where the industry is? Because this is obviously a newer industry that is coming around as we have more and more batteries coming up for second lives and third lives and re-scrapping or improvement after having served their life as a battery in our cars, as an example. Where are we? Do we already have demand for this type of solution? Where are we?
Yeah, so I would say, generally speaking, the battery industry is still quite immature. We have, of course, looking to Asia, there is already a very, very mature value chain when it comes to the whole, let's say, procedure and the whole steps for batteries. But in Europe, every step from raw material mobilization to cell production over to system assembly, and even the EV market penetration are quite immature. And this also is valid for the, let's say, aftermarket, where batteries are scrapped. And when looking into this recycling industry, like zooming in here a bit, we see that there are companies who are doing actually some sort of refurbishment of the batteries. And then there are some companies who are doing, let's say, pre-processing of scraps. This means first mechanical treatments so that the resources are maybe in smaller grain size or whatever. So the first steps are already covered in Europe, but we have a very, very large gap for refining metallurgy, meaning we want to have separate raw materials. We want to have lithium separated from cobalt. And this just not exists in Europe. And therefore, here the market immaturity is super critical because without this very step, our gigafactories don't have material to produce their battery cells. And therefore, for us, it's so important to close the loop in Europe. And we are actually, let's say, a missing link here.
Could you, Carmel, sorry for stealing the thunder here. I'm just asking some questions to try and really understand where are we, because one of the things I've heard about batteries in Europe, and that is the following statement, that the Chinese ecosystem is so much stronger and far further ahead that batteries as an investor, it might be from a sovereign perspective interesting and important, but as a VC, I'm not touching it. Obviously, that's not true. You've just raised 55 million in a Series A from some of the most revered investors, Porsche Ventures, World Fund, Speed Invest. The line goes on. You have a grade A investors. So obviously, there are people that don't subscribe to that view. Could you talk a bit about where that's wrong, where it's potentially true, how you navigate it, how you talk about it?
The industry is still evolving. As you correctly said, China is a bit of ahead. But that doesn't mean that Europe cannot keep up. And the question is, actually, we've seen that there are companies struggling, of course, but there are also companies who are really successful. I don't want to, go into name dropping here. But the thing is, many companies are really interested in diving deep into this battery value chain. Why? Because we in Europe rely a bit on our industry to generate wealth. And we are in a massive transformation here. The whole industry is transforming in electrification. And this is not only, we are always talking about batteries in mobility. Yes, that's very true. But batteries are also a crucial application for, let's say, energy storage for data centers, which even then fuel AI. And therefore, actually, in our whole, everywhere where you need somewhat energy, there is no walk around when it comes to lithium-ion batteries. Therefore, I would say we had problems in the last years to form attractive products, especially in the mobility sector, right? So a lot of car makers have really improved, the strength of the lithium-ion batteries, the attractiveness of the models put on the market. Here, we've seen that Europe kind of was a bit, late to the party. But we see in the numbers of 2025 that Europe is really putting all forces into competing in this race. Because the truth is, if we don't succeed in bringing the particular steps of electromobility, of electrification, of lithium-ion batteries in the European market, our industry is screwed. And this not only reflects to the battery space itself, but also, as I mentioned, to AI, to the military sector, and so on. So basically, I would say we kind of missed the first station in Europe, but we are still on a fast train.
And I think it's a really interesting analysis because your cylib is growing extremely fast. Your first raise was in 2022, if I'm not mistaken. You're already building your factories and going forward. You decided to go for an end-to-end solution where a lot of people are doing very specific things. What drove such a big vision and being able to raise a substantial round and get support from government with such substantial funds? What drove your vision to think that it can be done differently? What do you think others are misunderstanding or under evaluating?
For us, it was clear in the beginning. If we are really bringing the technologies we had developed to the market by ourselves, we have to and we will do it fast. Why? Because actually the industry is changing at a very high pace currently, and partnerships are formed now. Besides, there are also American companies who are already, scaling their technology. I would say, of course, ever since 2022, a lot changed also with competitors from other continents. But we've seen that we have to reach a certain size within our company very, very fast to play a part in this battery game. The corporates who are really going into the battery space need partners now, need partners they can rely on. And a reliable partner is a partner who is also industrializing and being able to take all the materials in. And maybe taking all the materials in is a good bridge, because we were doing technical consulting in 2022, and we have seen that the market is really big, that the scrap arising from both production scrap and also end of life is just immense, and we have had no companies inside who were able to take this material and make something useful of that. So we've seen actually a pain point in the market to really be convinced to go in the market, and we have seen that the pace is really needed to play with the large players along with the large corporates we want to work with. And then, of course, last but not least, what drove us was our conviction in the special technology we had developed, because we've studied all types of companies being active in that space, and we haven't seen someone who really takes all the raw materials into account, how you should do it if you really mean battery recycling and resource efficiency quite serious. And so this was what was, I would say, our backbone, our strong belief in the technology and the changes of our technology.
So maybe geopolitics actually works a bit in your favor in this case, the need for a resilient supply chain, a local supply chain, where a lot of us in climate are feeling geopolitics pressure us. In your case, maybe it's working in your favor.
It is, actually it is. So that's a plus. I mean, the industry is already, moving forward, but to have the, tailwind from the political sector, because what we are doing is, super critical for our industry, and therefore also for our independence as Europe in a very challenging global environment, is a huge plus. And this is also connected to the battery regulation, where everyone says we have to get rid of regulation. We are doing too much regulation in Europe. I would say this doesn't really count for the raw material sector, because frankly speaking, in Europe, we are in an unfair competitive landscape, where other countries are building out tax rules, etc., in their favor. But in Europe, we have to find answers to that, to save basically our raw materials and our energy supply. And therefore, it's great to see the signs of the European Union and also from Germany, that here is a clear will to also invest in sovereignty and resilience.
This is a perfect example of how climate has transitioned into a sovereignty thesis instead. And those are really a lot of the investments that we're seeing having strong traction are, of course, in that exact resilient sovereignty space when it comes to climate. I'd love to ask you something else, and that's about your funding round, because one of the really difficult things for most companies when you're building in hardware is, of course, that you have to stitch together a funding round that has equity on the one side, but it doesn't make sense to fund everything out of equity. And that's, of course, also why you raise a 55 million Series A, and at the same time have almost the same in public funding. Can you talk a bit about how you did that, how you navigated it, how you balanced the different instruments against each other?
Yeah, absolutely. You're fully right. Just, going with a hardware vision, an hardware company, to full industrial scale, just with equity, doesn't make any sense at all. That's just not sustainable in terms of the company growth. And therefore, for us, it was quite early clear that we need to have the conviction and the buy-in of different stakeholders. So basically, we rely on three pillars, I would say. Of course, still equity, super important. Then, as you already addressed, public grants of different levels. I will talk about that a bit more in a minute. And then in a third pillar, looking to banks, we will need somewhat debt. And this is actually the only way to bring young scaling company in a hardware space to operations. And so with this early understanding, we really invested a lot of time and efforts from the whole cylib team in navigating through the public grants landscape in Europe. Basically, we've seen the IRA from the US. We've seen that a lot of companies were invested and supported by governmental incentives. But for Europe, we were super skeptical, and the path is very tricky, right? You need to really check out heaps of grants and see which grant and call is fitting for you. And this costs really a lot of time. And therefore, we also wrote proposals which were not granted. We also wrote R&D proposals, which also are an interesting puzzle piece for our growth. They are probably not the big investive grants, but they are still in the, let's say, 500,000 sector where you really can do something with it. So we've talked to political stakeholders. We built up early relationships to really understand which call is searching for and to be with the right idea in the right call, because this can be actually a showstopper, right? If you have a great idea, but you're applying in the wrong call, you might just not continue. So this was actually a very strategic project, I would say. We were pushing, and also we wanted to be absolutely sure that the financial aspects of our grants are bulletproof. That's why we also got professional support in the financing, because frankly speaking, when you are applying for a grant and you do anything which could be potentially already an investment in the scope, you have something we call in German forschungsschädlich oder förderschädlich, so damaging to your grant. And therefore, it was super important to us to not only know how the grant landscape looks like, but also how we get the financials straight.
Here you're describing what I would think can be considered a critique of the current system, that yes, there's money, but it's very complex to navigate, and some of the rules make it hard for a startup to actually move forward with the things that are important to them, because they might be showstoppers later in the grant permissioning process.
Yeah, I mean, I cannot complain because we really actually are quite lucky with the support we received. But I know from other companies as well that the, like, let's say, time period after filing a proposal until receiving a grant is quite long. And therefore, sometimes, especially hardware companies can really struggle if they really rely on those grants and are just sort of in the waiting line. This can be like another challenging part. But I also feel like we shouldn't make Europe worse than it actually is, because there are a lot of, let's say, strategic grants available. You just have to find the right ones and also be with the right project idea to those particular grants. And the European Commission or Union does a lot in that sense. But I fully agree with what you said. The navigation is quite tricky because there's such a variety.
And within these different forms of capital, there's another form of capital that I believe you have a partnership with, which is corporates and the role that they have to play in helping close the gaps and helping grow the technologies. How did you build out those relationships? And do you look at them as part of your capital stack, or is that more the business development and partnership?
We have two strategic investors from large corporates, so Porsche Ventures and RBVC, Bosch Ventures, and both of them have, of course, a vision when it comes to the market we are moving in, and so we see their capital as very strategic sign how those corporates want to be involved in the battery sector. So, for instance, the collaboration with Porsche Ventures began on a technical level. It began with like proof of concept, a POC project within our pilot line, where we really were discussing with the sustainability department of Porsche how we could really improve their environmental footprint by the right recycling methods and also enabling access to raw materials. And this was like the first hypothesis. So we started in actually receiving material from Porsche, which we then processed and discussed the results of their of the project. And with that being said, Porsche acknowledged that this can be a valuable contributor for their business. And with that being said, we built up also a relationship with Porsche Ventures, who really, have to act in the favor of their corporate. This was actually a really nice synergy, why we see, of course, business corporations on the one hand side, but having actively, let's say, investments placed in those companies goes beyond just a business some symbiosis. It's just really an, let's say, metaphor for how crucial this market is for the particular corporate. And
could you share a bit of your core learnings? What would be your advice to other founders that are trying to wrap their head around and come up with a strong plan for working with corporates? Because unfortunately, there are also many bad stories of offtake agreements that never get fulfilled, of POCs that never really come to fruition, and so on.
So there are so many learnings. Where can I start? So I think firstly, when signing long-term deals, they have to be, of course, bulletproof. So there is no way out. So to begin with, you should really ask the questions: what do the clients really need? Which pain point am I solving? Because actually, you always discuss in business about the product market fit, and you can do heaps of studies of research, you can read forecasts, that's all fair, but actually you have your product market fit just fixed when you have an actual client for which you have a very specific solution, and this can be a variation of what you found in literature. This can be actually a very different idea than you had before. and you need to actually do efforts. You need to stretch a bit to adjust your solution to the one your partner really seeks. Why? It's really paying off in the end. It's a lot of effort, and it can be, and we did that. It can be that you have to invest a bit more than you thought. So you shouldn't see a POC just as a commercial transaction to, get a bit of revenue. That's not the target. The target is more to develop together a unique solution which is actually scalable then in the market. And therefore, we also had a POC where we really sourced a lot of equipment, which we initially didn't have, but we've seen we need to add that to make this project really successful. And therefore, of course, this was not a profitable project for us in the first place, but then it turned out to be profitable on the long haul. Really talking to companies and asking what they really need, and then not shying away from proposing creative ideas. Because when I was in research, everyone was laughing at the word design for recycling. They were like, no one is doing that. They have just, monetary interest in their scope. But design for recycling is an amateur's dream or whatever. But it turns out that design for recycling can really also lead to commercial plus. So if you find a solution together which is not only more sustainable but then also cheaper, that's of course something a partner would apply. And therefore, I can only encourage young companies to really dare to propose also creative ideas. And then I think the third thing I really learned is you have to have a bit of patience. Working with corporates is unfortunately not always high pace, and therefore you should be super early in approaching companies and shouldn't feel like a perfectionist waiting for, let's wait until our product is just perfect and then we approach our large partners. No, you can approach them earlier, work together, collaborate, and then consider a bit more waiting time, so that you're not in a bottleneck.
And just going back to the strategy for fundraising for a second, it sounds to me that what you're saying is that you were very intentional of your capital stack from very, very, very early on. So would you recommend founders to start really thinking of the next 2-3 rounds really before they're in the market? What would you tell founders about being intentional on their capital stack and educating themselves?
So I think what was very much helping us was that us three founders were very early with the road we wanted to go. So you can start a company and just see where it goes. That's all good. But the earlier you are thinking about your growth roadmap, like how big do you want to grow, where do you want to grow, etc. So the more precise you are, the better, because then you are very well prepared for all the rounds coming up. So we knew the Series A was going to be tough, but it wasn't any surprise because we already knew how much capital we needed and what the expectations were. And this is basically, especially for hardware companies, a very critical gap, when you need a lot of capital, but you're pre-industrialization, so you're let's say, profitability and so on. That's a very, very, let's say, tough spot to be in. And we knew that this was actually going to be the challenging point. In deep tech and in climate tech, there are, let's say, several great early stage investors. But of course, it gets more challenging the further you go down the road. And therefore, it really helped us to be very, very sharp with how big we want to scale and communicate this very early on to potential investors, because actually you build up relationships early. You get to know each other most of the time before you actually need capital. And therefore, it was already great at an early stage to see which investors would be possibly a lead here, and to really spend some time with them and focus on them. And therefore, we still need a lot of capital, so it's a continuing story. But it really helped that we knew how big we want to go with our first industrial build out, and what our entry and exit points of the process should be.
Carmel and Lilian, before we close, I want to take us to something quite different, which is that, and that you both have great war stories here, so I'll turn the mic over to you in a second. But if we focus on you, Lilian, you're building together with your spouse, which means that you're also building a young family at the same time. That, I imagine, from being a father myself and having my son in the room next door, a bit sick, but he's chilling out with some Lego, so hopefully he won't barge in a second. But I'd love to hear a bit about that story. Carmel, you can also share yours, because I know you have some war stories as well, from trying to build and trying to be in the market at the same time as you're trying to build a family.
Yeah, well, actually, yeah, working together, with my husband is a fun thing to do, but also, of course, has challenging aspects. But for us, everything developed supernatural because of the, let's say, skills we bring in the company. We already had a lot of exchanges over our, let's say, professional lives, because we are coming from a certain similar background, so we have an understanding for each other. Founding a company together is really bringing this to ink, right? It's another type of marriage. And this has, of course, the large benefit that you don't have to explain why you're coming home late or so, and you have like very good communication. So within the company, the distances are very short. We don't need, let's say, polite dances around each other. We come to the point quite fast. And this is super, super cool, actually. I wouldn't change that. And by having a child, another, let's say, complexity entered the room. And this is for sure a complexity. So we have to be a bit more flexible regarding changing situations, because you cannot talk to a baby and say, like, I'm a bit late, sorry, can you wait a moment or so? You just have to, ask from your colleagues and from your investors a certain degree of understanding and flexibility, because sometimes the appointments we used to have at 7 at night are then rather early in the morning or so, right? So a lot of things change. But I'm very lucky that both our investors and our team are very understanding. We bring our child to work every day. So we have actually a dedicated baby room, so that everything is feasible. And at least the colleagues never complain about the sounds you hear sometimes. So yeah, I think it's complex and challenging, and of course stressful, but on the other hand side, I'm very, very lucky to have my most important male people around me so much.
I love that. I think it's so refreshing to hear founders talking about their family as an integral part of building a business, and as a recovering entrepreneur, I feel that it makes it's such an upside, because life is intertwined and things are complicated, and being able to have this flexibility is incredible. I think we're seeing a shift in the market. I think we're seeing more investors being more open to it, more founders, male and female, more, or just people in the ecosystem in general being much more open to talking about their personal roles and not only their company roles. Definitely not the way I kind of raised my kids that are older, and definitely every time I brought my kids to work or had them during meetings around with some help around. Everybody always was like, "This is very inappropriate." um, but I think it is geography based, and it is also the culture that you're bringing, and the more open we are of this blend, the more diversity we can bring into our teams. And I love it. I think it's inspiring. It's great to hear. Thank you for the example.
I think it's an incredible story. I think hats off to you. We're building, my wife and I, a family of four. Um,
Hats
like
off to
I
you.
definitely not simple. And I would not want my wife to have a high pressure job next to me. That would be very interesting to behold. I also always say, like, if we just should reflect on it a second, I always say, you never know what kids you get. And that's maybe the difficult thing that I would say around having children as a founder, that you don't, like, it is a bit of a roll of a dice, because like my son turned out to have both autism and ADHD, which means, okay, not super simple. Like the plan of you just working and plowing ahead, like maybe that would break the family if I just hold on to that dream. And I do think that like that's maybe the one thing where I see that you never know where you go, because I think with most kids you can manage. But I think hats off to you for doing it, and hats off for everyone on your team and your investors, of course, as well. I think obviously we need to be able to build with balance and building a family at the same time. But it's not an easy thing, and it's not, yeah. And I do think that maybe if we should say something structurally here, it comes with a cost. Like it's not, like as an example, you're that now you have a baby room, as you said, but likely you'll also pretty quickly, if you are a founder, you're gonna need help, which that might add a 3K or 4K cost on the company or whatever, because that's what's needed. But it's just like, we're all already investing millions and millions. So like, don't make that a problem. And just say, okay, this of course is the policy that we're backing our founders, and the founders have lives and journeys that they are on as well. And of course, it's not a problem to also support with those things.
Ada Ventures does it amazingly, right? And really built in structured support to say that it's okay. And it's not only kids. We have elderly parents. God forbid other things happen. And life is full of the unexpected. And I think building strong companies, building strong, whether it's the venture arms or the startups that we're building, it's about knowing that we need to be flexible in what we're building and being able to adjust and reconfigure. And it's really important to remember we never know what tomorrow is going to bring.
Lilian, no matter what, absolute massive congrats to you for everything you've done so far. Cylib, I noticed that Carmel is pronouncing it different from me. Let's just set the record straight before we close. Cylib or Cylib?
I'm sorry, Carmel, it's cylib, yeah.
Well,
Andreas,
yes,
Andreas wins here.
for once I won. Well, do you know Zapier makes you happier? I think we all need that type of nomenclature or funny sayings so that everyone can know how we pronounce our weird tech names. So, Lydia, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and congrats on everything. Carmel, thank you for co-hosting.
Congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.